You're listening to Bold Hearts, Big Moves, the show for female entrepreneurs who want it all: a thriving business, deep self love, and fulfilling relationships. I'm Erin Anderson, and each week we will dive into how to set stronger boundaries, make empowered choices, and show up in life and business with boldness, authenticity, and heart. Because let's be real, the money you make is directly related to the love that you have for yourself and the strength of your relationships. So if you're ready to lead with love and make those big moves with those bold hearts, let's dive in.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Bold Hearts, Big Moves. So last week we chatted about the listening boundary, and today I wanted to talk to you guys about the talking boundary. And now I want to say that the listening and the talking boundaries are your foundational boundaries. Obviously, your listening boundary is your number one, because you have to have a really great listening boundary in order to know how to speak well, in order to understand what your physical boundaries are, your sexual boundaries are, what your energetic boundaries are, your time and your money boundaries as well. You need to listen to your results, right? And what results you want. It's important for us to listen to feedback. But our talking boundary is our number two boundary because it gives us clarification. It gives us the ability to take a look at what someone else is saying and making sure that we're on the right path to their filter, that we can actually understand their filter. Because honestly, without a good talking boundary, a listening boundary is also non-existent. We cannot ask for clarification. We cannot ask for feedback and be able to accept both the clarification and the feedback without a really good talking boundary as well. So I want you guys to think about this. Like, your listening boundary is basically a way for you to create self-protection. And the talking boundary is a great way for you to create self-containment, because how we respond or how we speak, even, like, it's not even so much about responding as it is just about speaking. Without that, then we tend to not have the clarity that we're seeking for, and we cannot listen properly without clarity. So talking and listening boundaries are very interchangeable, both of them very, very important. Okay. And you also need a talking boundary in order for you to state where you're at on certain subjects. Okay. It gives you the ability to take complete and utter control over your perceptions and your results. And that is exactly where you want things. Um, Coming from the world of betrayal trauma, one of the things that I could see as I was uh, working with clients or listening to women that were stuck very heavily in betrayal trauma is that they were looking for a certain result, but expecting their husband or business partner or whoever it was to create that result for them, right? And they would say things like, well, I can't because he won't, or I can't because they won't. And the truth of the matter is we do have actions that we can take. We just need to be willing to take them. See, one of the things that I see a lot when people come up against the talking boundary is that they get very attached to the opinions and perceptions of another person. They make immediate judgments and assumptions upon what that other person is thinking or saying. And that causes them to act in not healthy ways. As I was researching the talking boundary, I came upon a therapist as she that was talking about the talking boundary, talking about the talking boundary. That's saying that a lot. Anyway, but she was she put in her story about a wife who had assumed, and I don't know how, but she had assumed that her husband was going to file for a divorce. And so she went out and filed for the divorce to quote unquote beat her husband to the punch. Well, come to find out, the husband actually never even thought about having a divorce. He never even had it in his mind. And so it created a lot of trauma, a lot of pain, and a lot of financial distress, legality, just a lot of mess for the family, because she just went out and assumed and took action upon her assumptions, right? We get so emotionally involved and connected to the thoughts and opinions and filters of another person. And it's easy to do it sometimes because, some people are very, very close to us in our inner circles. And we don't want to be hurt. And so we tend to make knee jerk or snap reactions to what we perceive from another person. So, some things we want to do is we want to stick to the facts. Okay. Number one, what is it you actually heard? Remember, in the listening boundary, we're going to take a look at the actual words and phrases that stood out to us, right? And double check, make sure you understand that. Hey, this is what I heard you say. Is this what you meant? Second, you also can talk about what you saw. Now, someone who is out to gaslight you will try to get you to disbelieve what you saw and heard, right? If you have a really high talking and listening boundary, you don't get involved in the stories and thoughts of another person, especially when they don't make sense. And if somebody's trying to gaslight you, that kind of tends to happen. Like it just doesn't make sense. But we want to believe them again because we get so involved or emotionally involved in the outcome or the story of the other person so we can somehow fix or heal the relationship. So, how do we not get involved? Right? Well, number one, again, remember the talking boundary is about self containment, the listening boundary is about self protection. When we listen to certain keywords and phrases, all we're doing is simply asking the right questions, right? Again, coming down to saying, hey, this is what I heard you say. Is this what you meant? Well, no, that's not what I meant at all. Oh, okay. Can you help clarify for me? And again, you're listening to keywords and phrases. Well, so you're saying this and this again. Are you saying this and this? It still sounds like this is what you meant. Right? And so you keep seeking, instead of for believing the other person, you keep seeking for clarification. Oftentimes, if somebody actually does not have honorable intentions towards you and the relationship and the communication, that's going to frustrate them and they will often shut down the conversation. But somebody who really actually does have honorable intentions and wants a relationship with you will work to clarify and will take feedback. And this is part of the reason why a talking boundary is so important, especially, well, it's in any relationship, I should say, whether it be just in your life relationships or in your business relationships. Because again, we want to have business relationships that we enjoy working with, right? Same thing with our home life. We want to have a home life where we enjoy coming home, where we don't feel like we're in a consistently toxic environment, right? And you can even say something along the lines of, "Hey, uh, the words uh, fat, disgusting, and horrible say, those were some of the words that you picked out, are really inflammatory for me and actually quite offensive for me. Um, that feels really toxic to me. So for this reason, I'm going to shut down the conversation right here. If you would like to try to find other words that are not so cruel, let's chat, right? But it's like, this is why I'm saying, like, you again want to have a really strong listening boundary because you're really listening for certain keywords and certain phrases so that way you can respond appropriately. Now, again, with the talking boundary too, you're going to speak in a way that you believe about yourself, right? So, for example, someone who believes that they themselves are uh, respectful and kind, but also emotionally intelligent and emotionally mature, they don't feel the need to get drawn emotionally into somebody else's story. They can listen to the story, they can ask questions about the story, but if the person is unwilling to change the story, we can respect that, right? Even though it might not match our filters and our words. And so we look to respect those things, but we also know that there are certain ways that we're just not going to work with that person. Okay. The other thing about the talking boundary is, and the listening boundary, actually, I mean, the two of them work hand in hand. It's really hard to have the one without the other. Okay. But I want you to think about this. If you're trying to explain in English how to get to somebody's hotel when all they understand is Chinese, it's really hard to communicate, right? We need to be able to communicate. Now, there's three ways that I found that people communicate with each other. Obviously, our words, right? We communicate with our words. Um, but we also communicate with our actions and our energy. So our talking boundary is actually going to filter into all the other boundaries as well. Because have you ever heard the term actions speak louder than words? Most likely, yes, right? So in the case of the Chinese person and the English person, right? If words are not working, then we might try our actions, right? This is part of the reason why when we feel like what we're saying is not being heard, we tend to get big, loud, and scary. We start to yell and scream and stomp and throw a fit, right? Because then maybe we'll be heard. But in all reality, what we tend to do is just make ourselves louder. And all the other person is hearing is yelling, screaming, and fit throwing, right? Doesn't mean they're still hearing you at all. So, what do we do about the situation? Well, we draw a map, right? If you're an English person and all the Chinese person knows how to do is say, lost, find hotel, Grand America. Now, if you guys know Utah, there's a Grand America hotel here, okay? But say, like, that's what they're looking for. And you can say, you could say, okay, well, you're going to go left down 600 South, and then you're going to take a right, and blah, 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 right? But those Chinese people aren't going to understand what you're saying. So we take a map, we take a piece of paper, and we draw a map from where they're at to how to get to the hotel, right? When we're communicating, we are trying to arrive at a certain destination. There's usually a goal that either you want or the other person wants, or maybe there's even a common goal between the two of you. if communicating with your words isn't working, if you're going to choose to communicate with your actions, they have to be wise. It has to be drawing the map. Okay. So what I mean by this, okay, so say like maybe you have a client that is not listening to what you're saying. Maybe you have a child or a husband that is not hearing what you're saying, right? And is not allowing you the ability to be heard, because that's what the talking boundary does. It allows you to be heard and understood. Um, if this is the case, then perhaps this is where we need to enact another type of boundary. So for example, a couple of nights ago, I was gone on some sort of a trip, and one of my boundaries is the kids do their chores while I'm gone. Well, I came home to a mess, right? Well, I could have got bigger, louder, and hairier, or I could have taken a look at my physical boundary, because that's one of my boundaries in my physical space, is that my spaces are organized and clean. And I don't always want to be the one doing it. It's important to me that kids understand cleaning and organization, because they're going to need those things as adults. So I made the decision, cool, if this is the house you want to live in, I'm going to go out to the trailer and I'm not coming in until the house is clean. And so far, that has worked very well, because they want mom to come in and help with dinner. They want mom to come in and chat with them. They want mom to do certain things. Well, in order for those things to happen, mom needs to have the space in order for that to happen. So I used my talking boundary, number one, by simply stating the fact, hey, I made the request, guys, because remember, again, we make the request, okay? I made the request that the house was clean and that you guys did your chores. They're not that hard. They're really not that big. It'll take you maybe 15 minutes to do it. That request was ignored. So I'm going to go out to the trailer and I'm going to live out there until the until things are done properly. They got the house cleaned really quick. Okay. So maybe and that's kind of where we start to draw the map. Like, hey, if this is not the destination you want, then we have to find a better way to come together. Perhaps it's a husband that's not listening, right? And no matter how often you try to communicate, maybe he just is not getting it. This is where it's a good idea sometimes just to completely back off and instead let them kind of experience life on their own. And you can start to ask questions like, well, why do you think that happened? What did you take that to mean? Right? Because oftentimes when life kind of happens and we have tried to explain how these certain decisions or these certain actions are not going to work, life tends to have a way of bringing up the frustration and what's really going to happen. And people do need to have their own experiences to form their own opinions, and from their own opinions, they take action. We wish that people would listen to us, right? And it does require a lot of patience to have a good talking boundary. But oftentimes, people will come to their own correct conclusions when they are allowed to have their results, right? The job of a talking boundary is, again, to help yourself be heard, but also to give perspective to yourself and the other person. You can ask questions, right? But it's never okay to tell someone what they should do or what they should believe. All you can do is uh, keep to yourself, really. You're the only person you can control is you. And that's a good thing. I would much rather control myself than try to control other people. That's just too much. Okay? The other thing too about offering too much information or telling somebody what they should believe, eventually what happens is the other person will shut down. They'll stop listening anyway. Um, Again, people need to come to their own conclusions. We take fact based upon what we know, like from what we've experienced, right? There's a lot of women out there who believe that men are horrible, right? Because they've just had a lot of really horrible experiences with men. But instead of saying, I've had really bad experiences with men, they tend to say that all men are horrible, right? It's a very different thing. We take what we've had, our perceptions and our experiences create a perception, and we use that perception as truth in the world. But it isn't until we start to really get curious about our perceptions and gauge them against what we know to be true that we actually come to a truthful understanding, right? So let's talk about how to use the talking boundary as a female entrepreneur or even as a mom. Because remember, I do feel like a lot of the things that we do as mothers are often similar behaviors in business. So I know personally that people want to be heard, right? People love being listened to. People love the chance to clarify. It creates trust. It creates a space of being seen. And these are all things that you want with your clients, right? We want to give our clients and our families a really great experience with us, right? This is part of the reason why mamas are always the first person that kids call when they get home, right? Moms are well, women in general, I would say, are very keen on communication. We are, it's kind of built within us to be very attuned to what people are saying. We're nurturers by design, and so having a good listening and talking boundary are very key for us. Um, but when in business, when a client has a great experience with you because you are bringing to the table a really good and talking and listening boundary, um, they often want to keep working with you. For example, there's a billboard on like past I-15, right? By the Ken Garff Auto Company, and they actually use the talking boundary as their slogan, right? We hear you. We listen to what it is you want in a car. We uh put you in that car and we never push. Right? Now, whether I don't know if that's true or not, if they actually operate that way. Um, as I haven't personally bought a car with Ken Garff. But I do know that there are people in my life that I will consistently do business with because they have really good talking and listening boundaries. They really do hear me. They really listen to what I'm saying, right? And if something is untrue, they help me see how it's untrue, not by sharing their opinion over mine, but by helping me think about the choice that I have to make. Those are people that I love working with over and over and over again. The person that I personally actually buy my cars from, I will always buy my cars from them for this reason. They really listen to what I have to say, to what it is I really want, and they go and find the exact thing that I want, and I'm willing to pay them for that. And this is really important when we understand what it is that people want, what they claim to want. we can go create that very thing for our clients. So, how do we moderate the talking boundary? Well, one of the things that I love to do is I really love to map out the conversation in my head, especially if I know it's going to be a difficult one. I really like to think about it before I engage in the conversation. So, number one, I might say something along the lines of, or I might like think about like the situation, what I know I need to say. And then I think to myself, after I say that in my mind, how will that person respond? I actually take my clients through a situation very similar, right? Where we do a little bit of role play and I have them play the person that they're frustrated with while I play them with boundaries, right? And I show them how this works. So, for example, one of my clients was really frustrated with her husband who really just struggles to hear her. He wants her to kind of be the one that fixes everything. And he whenever she tries to come to him with some of her concerns, he downplays them, right? And I'm not saying that this man's a bad guy, it's just he's got a weakness. And so we did this role play, and I played her. I said, okay, or hey, husband, I am really not feeling very connected to you right now. Um, and I think the reason why is because I'm feeling, take ownership of feelings, right? I am feeling unheard. I've tried to express XYZ to you quite a few times now, and every time I'm met with this response, right? That's sticking to the facts as I'm saying this. Um, do you feel like this is something you and I can change? Right? Now, she responded with, well, why do you think it's always me? Good grief, I'm always the one that has to fix everything. Why can't you and I, why can't you just be happy? Right? And that's how he would usually respond to her requests. Remember that we're using that listening boundary then, and so we're looking for keywords and phrases. Why do you feel like I'm always the one or why do you feel like I'm always coming at you? Explain to me how I'm coming at you. Well, you just can't ever be happy with what I do. Okay. What is happiness to you? What does happiness look like to you? Well, you never complain. Okay. So what I'm hearing you say is never complaining is is the sign of someone that's happy. Yeah. Okay. So what about you? Do you ever complain? Like, if that's the case, then why do you complain about me when, say, I leave my purse on the couch? If that's the case, then you're not happy with me either, right? And you see how that worked? It it gave my client an ability to communicate in a way that either the other person decides to shut down the conversation. And again, remember that if somebody's going to consistently shut down the conversation and not willing to actually go deeper or look for ways that they can improve, that's probably not someone that's really invested in the relationship, right? But if you use this boundary that way, it can also help you find truth. And truth that both of you can work upon and act on and learn from. Now, from there, somebody might yell and say, like, how dare you, blah, blah, blah. This is not about me, right? But in reality, A true listening boundary and a true talking boundary is about, again, keeping you safe, helping you feel heard, and keeping another person's perceptions with them. It is their perception, and you cannot make another person do something or act a certain way. And it's acting off of this understanding that helps you stay solid. A couple years ago, I had somebody who's very dear to me, uh, get kind of irritated at me. And I don't remember what it was, why they were irritated. I think it had something to do with their perceptions about motherhood and how my perceptions didn't match theirs. And so because of that, they claimed that I was neglecting my children, in which, it's absolutely untrue. Using my listening boundary right, I know for a fact that's absolutely untrue. My kids are very well taken care of. But the way they chose to communicate this to me was, I just wish I could ignore my children and stare at a computer all day too. Make them fend for themselves, right? Well, I had a choice in this moment. I could get really offended, even though it wasn't true, or I could simply respond. So you feel like I neglect my children? Yes, you're so neglectful. Okay. Well, you're welcome to believe that if that makes you happy. It's not about me taking on responsibility for the thoughts and opinions of another person. A good talking boundary leaves the thoughts and opinions of another person with that person, and keeps your thoughts and opinions with you. Another thing about a good talking boundary is it's not about forcing someone to have a relationship with you, forcing someone to hear you, forcing someone to see you or understand you. Sometimes a good listening and talking boundary is also about allowing somebody to be let go out of your life or even out of your business. It's not about conforming to what another person thinks or feels, but if somebody in your company is not performing, it's also time to let them go, right? A couple of years ago, I also had hired an online business manager. And every time I got on a call with her, she was kind of spacey. Every single time I said what it was I wanted, she always had her own thoughts and opinions on the way things should be done when I wanted them done a certain way. Oftentimes, those things weren't done on time. And eventually, I had to make a decision that I needed to hire somebody else, right? And so I had to have a very difficult conversation with her about how I didn't feel like things were working out. Well, she took a lot of offense at that. She was not happy, and said all kinds of things that were not kind or true. Um, and I got to decide at that point too that none of that was true, right? What was true was simply what I was seeing, how she was showing up in my company, and it wasn't working out well for me. It still allowed me, though, to be respectful towards her and understand that the most kind and loving thing I could do, because her actions were showing up and saying, hey, I actually cannot take care of this job, even though I'd had many conversations about what it was I truly wanted with her, right? It gave me the ability to let her go because I knew that she could not do what it was I needed her to do or show up the way I needed her to show up. I didn't do it with anger and I didn't do it with malice. It was simply, this is just not working out. Now, however she feels about me is her thoughts and her perceptions, and it's not something I'm going to get involved in. This is also really good to use in your money boundary as as a female entrepreneur. When you're talking about pricing with a client, oftentimes they can feel very, very overwhelmed, right? But if you use a good listening and talking boundary, you can get to the root of the overwhelm with them and help them make a decision that is in their best interest, right? We're here to serve people and have an exchange. If our service is not right for the person, we need to have a good listening and talking boundary in order to understand that, as well as a good listening and talking boundary to understand if our services are right for that person and if it is something that they can actually create for themselves. Now, energetically, we actually do communicate as well. Oftentimes, that's not as much of a conscious communication as what it is subconscious, but we can, and we'll talk about this more in the energy boundary, but we can absolutely send signals to someone. Sometimes we walk into a room and we just get this vibe, right? Whether it be the vibe from the room or the vibe from the person. And sometimes it's like we've known this person our entire lives, right? And all that is energetic communication. Some people who are really intuitional can walk by people, but how we tend to act, how we tend to think, how we tend to view ourselves and our world actually is what does create one of our, well, not one of our, but it's what creates our energy. And we do get those vibes, like I said, from someone else. And so how we choose to show up in our lives actually is a very big piece of the talking boundary, how we choose to show up, right? So we get to use these pieces of the listening and the talking boundary to not only create a more harmonious home environment, but also to create much more in our businesses. In order to create more income with our businesses, we really need to listen to what it is our clients want and how they want it delivered. Um, and you can even ask yourself at that point, like, is that something I'm willing to do? Sometimes you also need to pair that against the things that you want too. And if they don't match up, then we need to take a look and see what it is we need to do differently, how we need to show up differently, and how maybe we even need to make a change in our business some way. Okay. So, my loves, I hope this was helpful for you. Talking about the talking boundary, really consider how it is you want to be perceived on this one. And really kind of stick to the facts. Make sure that you start with I statements. Keep it to your feelings. I felt this way when you did XYZ instead of you made me feel, right? And in business as well as in life, remember that, having a really good listening and talking boundary are leadership skills. So I hope this was helpful for you guys. Next week, we're going to be speaking about the physical boundary. And until then, I will see you guys. Bye.
All right, Boundary Boss Babes. I'm super excited that you tuned in with me today. Make sure you tune in again next week as we chat about more Boundary Boss Babe topics. We're going to get into so many other things about how to set boundaries with your business, how to set boundaries with your relationships, so you can truly have the time, the money, and the flexibility that you are seeking. So tune in next week. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast. Let your other Boss Babe friends know about it. And also, if you've got any questions, make sure you submit them into the podcast by clicking on the Send Us a Text message at the bottom of the podcast description. I look forward to seeing you guys next week. See you later, Boss Babes.